Good morning. I'm Dr. Petra. Welcome to our Science of Mind class here at CSLDallas and all around the world, wherever you are joining us from, whether it's down the street or across the globe. And for all of you who are here in the room, it's lovely to be getting close to finishing the first chapter. And I thought, oh, we're going to finish it today. And then I perused what we were going to talk about, and I thought, well, maybe not so much. So a couple of things to think about as we're talking about these next little 4 sub-chapters is to remember that what we're trying to do is to get out from underneath the cultural trappings of religion, the ways in which we have come to understand, or the images that we've created about this thing called God, which in so many cases we sort of got when we were kids, whether we went to a church or a synagogue or a temple or a mosque or an ashram, right? Or just that we got from culture. And what we're doing in this chapter is laying down an entirely different idea about the nature of reality, which also means that we're completely reconstructing an idea about what this word God actually is pointing to. We still use the word God because it's the biggest word we have for that which encompasses sort of how all of this came to be. And yet it comes with a lot of preconceived ideas and images that we have from all those things that I just said. So the reason why this is so important is, and to really dive into what we understand about the nature of reality, is because whether we think of ourselves as philosophers or not, whether we know it or not, the way in which we understand and therefore believe the nature of reality to operate undergirds everything. And when we are not conscious of what the undergirding, the ground of being or the framework within which we are engaging in life, if we don't understand it, it just keeps repeating itself and it just keeps running us, right? And it can create a box. So if we were raised with the ideas of heaven and hell and the devil, right, we are more likely to fall into dualistic thinking because it's either good or bad, and there are two forces, God and the devil. Even if we no longer use those terms, or if we have said, oh, that's silly, we no longer believe that, if we haven't confronted, then what would be the nature of reality that actually might make sense to us in a different way? If we haven't done that, do you see those old ideas might very much still be running in the background? And just changing the name of God to Spirit is not enough, right? We actually have to change the construct, which becomes the lens or the filter through which we look at life. So that's what these chapters, that's what these little subheadings are about. And at the top of page 68, at the end of that first full paragraph, we read this last week, it is significant that most of the great thinkers have arrived at similar conclusions, right? So the question is, what are these similar conclusions? And they are enumerated: the voice of God in creation, the thought of God or the word of God. The third one is spirit knows itself, and the fourth one is volition. And these 4 little pieces actually form the sort of basic idea of the nature of reality in its totality, not just the nature of the universe in physical form, right? And not just the nature of the intangible mystery, the thing we call God, but actually the whole of it. And of course, the questions are always the same. What in the world is going on here? How did all this happen? What is its point? What is going on? And then, of course, ultimately, how do we participate in it? Okay, so we talked a little bit about, we started last week with the voice of God in creation. So we're gonna try to hold the words lightly and see if we can't get under the words to what is being talked about. Because of course we're talking about an infinite transcendent reality, which is the whole of all of life, both tangible and intangible. And our words are designed to pinpoint something in specific that's separate from everything else so that we can point to it. That's a chair, that's a tree, that's a thought, that's the number 2, that's God, right? And so we're constantly navigating the fact that our language makes it hard to talk about these things, but that doesn't mean we can't get a sense of it. The great Buddhist phrase is, my words point to the moon. When I point to the moon, if you look at the finger that's pointing, you will miss the moon. Look where the finger is pointing. So we're going to take these words kind of the same way. Look at what they're pointing toward, as opposed to the semantics of every word. So we talked last week about this idea, the voice of God in creation, that it can only be one thing. And in the second paragraph, the first paragraph here, in the middle of it, the infinite must be one, for there could not be two infinite beings, right? The nature of infinity is that there's nothing outside of infinity. You can't, because infinity plus infinity does not equal two infinities, right? Infinity plus infinity equals infinity. So if we understand that the nature of reality is infinite, it can only be one. It can't be two. And therefore, all seeming change is merely the play of life upon itself. And how does life play upon itself? Which is by some interaction upon itself. Why? Because there is nothing other than the infinite one. What could it be playing upon? Do you see? If it's infinite, it's everything, and all the things that we say are nothing. It's everything physical and everything non-physical, tangible and intangible. And so the action has to be upon itself. You might want to grab a cup of coffee. Okay. So he talks about here some inner movement of life, right? So we started out with the voice of God because so many of our spiritual traditions use human words to point to something that is actually not made in the image and likeness of human beings. We are made in its image and likeness. And so what we want to do is not get stuck on the image, the finger pointing at the moon, but what could this voice be? And so here we have an inner movement of life. And the word God standing for or meaning the first, great, and only cause, right? So a movement of life, right? So everything that comes into being, that comes into form, into creation, is the result of a movement of life. All right, now we come to the thought of God or the word of God. This means the power of spirit to declare itself into manifestation, into form. Well, so a movement of life, great, but For what purpose? For what reason? Right? Something now has to shape that movement into something specific, to declare itself into manifestation. So this lovely lyrical religious phrase, the word of God, does not mean God actually has a mouth and is speaking words, and for sure would not be speaking in English. Right? So we obviously know that the word of God is a metaphor. It's a finger pointing at something, right? So we're gonna break out of this idea that somehow there is something or someone up there speaking words. We have this idea of an inner movement of life. The word of God means the self-contemplation of spirit. The manifest universe, as well as the invisible universe, which must also exist, is the result of the self-contemplation of God. What in the world does that mean? So we're going to skip over the Bible quotes. The starting point of all creation is the word of spirit. It is a concept, an idea, an image, or a thought of God. It is the self-knowing mind speaking itself into manifestation. The word back of everything is its initial cause. Okay, so we're still talking about a movement of life and this idea that something has to make it something specified into manifestation, right? Into action, and that means into form. Into manifestation means into form, because this movement of life is seeking to express itself into manifestation. The term thought seems to mean more to us than any other term in this connection. It seems to cover the meaning better, for we know that thought is an inner process of consciousness. An inner process of consciousness. Notice that thought isn't, well, I think I'm going to now think about $1 million. I think I'm now going to think about, oh, let there be light. I think I'm now going to think about, right? We get so hung up on this idea because of the language. So it's a movement of life, and it's an inner process of consciousness. So it's some combination of, we might use the term intentionality. Wait a minute. Concept, idea, image, or thought, right? And those were the terms that were available when this book was written in 1927. The word consciousness was still very much a part of the Eastern traditions. We were still in the West in a very Locke and Humean and Skinner point of view that says consciousness is the ghost in the machine. It's simply the result of the synapses firing, as opposed to the other way around, which the East has taught, which the alternative philosophical line has taught from Plato to Spinoza, and which is also in the Gnostic and all the mystical traditions, right? That's all the alternative line that says, no. Consciousness is cause, the brain is the organ through which consciousness operates, and to seek self-awareness. So we have a movement of life and an inner process of consciousness in the beginning of every creative act, a movement of life and an inner process of consciousness. Why would life want to move? To express itself, to be, right? Because otherwise, if there's only the intangible isness, well, there's nothing happening. That's why it's called no thing. That's why it's the intangible. it's no thing. The Hindus call it the ultimate void from which all things come. In the Tao, it's the way. The way begot the one, which begot the two, which begot the three, which begot the many thousand things. Right? And so in the intangible, absolute realm of consciousness, there is no thing, nothing. It's right. So the movement of life, we eventually will come to the idea that it's the impulse that life wants to express. Just look at a kid. Just look at a baby. A baby at some point gets tired of laying on its back. What does it do? It rolls over. And then it tries to sit up. And then it starts walking. Why? Because there's an urge of life to do, to grow, to be, to become, to express. And why does a seed burst out of its shell? Because there's life. It seems as though one of the properties of life is this self-expression, and that's essentially what growth means, right? This idea. So the movement of consciousness, the movement of life, is an inner process of consciousness. So there's so many different ways that we can experience inner processes of consciousness, and if we're talking about the ultimate infinite consciousness, right, it's not necessarily that God is thinking, well, I think I'm going to create a human being. I wonder what that would look like, right? I mean, but that's what I grew up thinking. and that somehow God knew that there was light, and it would say, let there be light, and light would be manifested. Later we'll see, I love this thing, later in the book it says, there's no shelf in the mind of God where there's a little airplane sitting, and that somebody's going to pluck the idea of airplane out of the mind of God and make it. No, there's a movement of consciousness for continued expansion. There are laws of aerodynamics and ways in which things can move in the air. And there is the desire, the inner process of consciousness that goes, what if we tried to do the same as the birds? And out of all of that, the form of airplane is expressed, or almost, till you figure out that one doesn't work, and that one doesn't work, and that one doesn't work, and that one doesn't work. It's just the forms, right? The forms continue to evolve because of the impulse of life and the inner process of consciousness. Okay. And so therefore this inner process of consciousness must be the beginning of the cause of all that exists. And as there are many existing things, there must be many thoughts in the mind of the infinite, right? Movements of consciousness. This is logical to suppose, for an infinite mind must necessarily conceive an infinite variety of ideas. Yes? It's an infinite reality, it's an infinite life and an infinite consciousness. Surely it's not going to have a lack of infinite impulse and movements of consciousness to try, just like we can try different kinds of airplanes until something actually flies. Hence the world of multiplicity. But the world of multiplicity does not contradict the world of unity, for the many live in the one. This concept of unity is the mystical secret of the ages, the key to spiritual wisdom and to the teachings of Jesus. And it's not the concept of unity without multiplicity. Do you see? Unity and multiplicity are two sides of the whole, which is the one. You can't just have unity, and you can't just have multiplicity. It's the whole, it's the two that actually are the fullness of the one. And so this means that creation, right, is actually a part of the one. And And the multiplicity, the separation of the forms is not bad and wrong. Because we always think our separation is something we have to get over. Right? Don't we say, well, if I could just not feel separate. But we aren't separate. And we feel separate for a reason. Because unity and multiplicity are two sides of the whole. Now, everybody in the room is going, huh? I bet you are too. And so this is why it's so important to spend time trying to grasp in some form or fashion these ideas. Because if we don't stretch outside of the box of our ordinary thinking, we cannot grasp what's really going on, and we cannot fully stand in the spiritual truth of who we are. We will forever stand in our humanness, looking at the infinite, at the one, at the creative force, at this movement of consciousness as something separate and outside of ourselves, something that we can't really understand. And it will keep our spiritual mind treatments hoping that we can bridge the gap between ourselves and spirit. But there is no gap. There's no gap. It's a continuum, it's a wholeness. And the created universe is the multiplicity of things that is the expression of the one, which is the, what did we say? The movement of life. Isn't that what we said? Mm-hmm. The movement of life through some inner process of consciousness. And the multiplicity of things, the diversity of creation is inherent in the oneness. It's not breaking the oneness. It's inherent within the oneness because infinity requires an infinite number of expressions to be expressed. Right? Otherwise, infinity isn't being expressed. That's how important and necessary you are. That's how important and necessary you are. Because without you, the infinity is not being expressed. There'd be infinity minus one, right? And that is an impossibility. You are necessary and important. So is every leaf, every tree, every being, every planet, every being that's living on any planet anywhere in the galaxies. Everything is important for the fullness and the expression of the one. So, we should just stop there because this is a lot. Let's just stop there. Because he's building this whole argument, each layer, layering on top, right? So that we confront truthfully, our limited idea about how all this works. And the whole point here is, it's like an extended Buddhist koan. The whole point is to pop us out into a mystical and profoundly, I guess, bigger, universal way of seeing, perceiving life and reality, rather than from our little psychological experience of being a human. So just hold it lightly. Let everybody chill for a minute, and we'll turn to Ryan and say good morning.
Well, good morning to you, Dr. Petra, and thanks for passing that on over to me. And hello to everybody here in the room, and welcome to all those watching us all over the globe on Facebook and in Zoom. We appreciate you being in community with us today. And what a juicy conversation. I don't even know how to make fun of that, She stumped me, guys. Anyway. So this is an engaging conversation, so hopefully somebody else has something great to say and adding to this mix. And so there's a couple ways that we do that. For those who are here with us in the room, we have a wonderful microphone for you to talk into, and an iconic Richard over here who just is absolutely fantastic with everything he does. And we also encourage everybody here in the room, pass it to a friend if you see somebody else who has a comment just pass it along. And for those who are joining us via Zoom, you already know what time it is. Hit that raise your hand icon down below, and I can bring you into the room. Or feel free to leave your questions and comments inside of the chat. And the same goes true for those who are joining us via Facebook. Hello from the other side of the country. Good evening to you all. And if you'd like to participate, feel free to put your questions and comments inside of the chat, and I can bring that into the room as well. So I just wanted to quickly survey the room here. Anybody have any thoughts, comments, questions? Okay, looks like we've got someone.
Brave soul, go for it.
Well, I don't feel too brave, but
Say your name, please.
my name is Ross Stewart, and the supposed father of psychology, William James, around 1883, said, consciousness is an accidental excretion of a higher order brain. That's profoundly affected all of psychology and all of these unconscious processes that you are a helpless victim of your history, your past, and everything else. And that was a breakthrough.
Right. Right. And it was a breakthrough, and it broke through some false ideas, but created new ones. Absolutely. And that has been in many cases, unless you're working with depth psychology or spiritually based psychologies, in many cases, has continued to be the point. And if a lot of places, a lot of universities are studying consciousness, and some of them are studying it from that point of view. Good enough. There are many others that are questioning that and asking, no, wait a minute, there really does seem to be something more than that going on. Yeah, thanks. All right, Ryan.
Yeah, it looks like we have some folks here in Zoom with their hands raised. I'm going to go ahead and call on Anita first. Anita, do you want to unmute yourself and join the conversation?
Good morning, Anita.
Good morning, Dr. Petra, everybody. You know, when you're mentioning, spirit showing up in multiplicity, it reminded me back a few years ago when I would go out and play with my horse. And there was absolutely no doubt in my mind that he too was spirit showing up in form.
Yes.
Just because of the energetic movement that happened between he and I, with no ropes, no halters, nothing attached to get him to influence, or me to influence his movement, or him to influence mine, right? And yet it was the harmony of the universe that intertwined that activity. And so for me, that's just an example of multiplicity showing up in form.
Yes, beautiful. I love that, Anita. Thank you so much for that. Thomas Troward talks similarly. He says it's all aliveness. Everything is equally alive. He uses the example, you use the example of you and your horse. He uses the example of a mouse and an elephant. Which one is more alive? It's a silly question. Just because one is bigger than the other doesn't mean that one is more alive than the other. And so this movement of life is I think there's something getting a hold of that. And we've learned to maybe equate life and consciousness, because even things that don't appear to move, like a horse or a mouse or an elephant, right? Plants don't seem to move in the same way, and yet clearly they're alive and they are responsive. And so then we extrapolate from that. Well, it doesn't appear as though rocks move, and yet there's this deep recognition that Gaia itself is a movement of life and consciousness. And we can look all through the galaxies, all through the universe. And so many astrophysicists have said they look out through the telescope and they see consciousness looking back. I know, it's fabulous, right? And so this is how we can see the oneness of aliveness, but the multiple ways in which that aliveness is being expressed, right? And so the movement of life, I think of it, and I know that we use it later in the book, that movement becomes an impulse, the impulse of life, which appears to be to express. And to express, it needs creation. It needs to create. It needs to create a multiplicity of forms through which to express. Thank you so much for sharing that, Anita. Okay, we've got 2 more hands here and 1 online. So, Ryan, we're going to let you manage it.
All right, I'm going to hook this microphone over to you. You ready
Jerry,
for it?
can you grab the microphone? We'll bring it up here to Shauna.
There we go.
Then we'll come back to you and Julia, and I know we have something online.
Yes, absolutely. Sounds like a good plan.
Go.
Go ahead.
I'm Shauna. As I read this passage again, I'm in the stage of my life where I have a lot of new things happening in my life. I'm choosing to have a lot of new things in my life, and that are really stretching me. And what shows up sometimes is fear. Mm-hmm. And every time I read this, I am reminded of our limitlessness.
Yes.
Right? That fear is not necessary, that it is limitless. And you know, the practice of getting beyond my own smallness.
Yes.
To be able to see that or trust it and believe in it, you know, I think that's a really important part of my practice.
Beautiful.
That I lose.
Yes. And I think that's exactly the thing, right? We're trying to pop ourselves out of the limitation and the smallness of our humanness. And our fears, basically the fear, what? That there's going to be a mistake, it's not going to work out, we're going to fail. Well, think of evolution. Think about how many branches of evolution stopped. And life didn't go, I better not try anything else. What if that happens again? Right? I mean, it's a silly thing to think about. If evolution didn't stop because certain branches simply couldn't evolve beyond that, or they the climate or the whatever caused them to stop, and then that one didn't grow anymore, and then other ones grew, right? So what? We're afraid it's going to stop. So if we are trusting that infinite impulse, then, well, we try something different. We try something new. We get up and pick ourselves up. We do it, right? I mean, and we can see that it is our human limitation and smallness that causes us to be afraid. Yes. And so when we can ground ourselves in this deeper truth, changes everything, doesn't it? Thank you so much for sharing that. I love that. Okay. We're going to go back in the room, and then we'll come back online.
Good morning. This is Julia.
Hi, Julia.
I just got to share that I want to thank you for the challenge. And I mean, I really am enjoying coming to class again. And I forget how important it is, because every time I come here, I learn something new. And I'm not really going to go into it, but the word, that's something that I really got to dive into. It's very interesting. But what I wanted to share was that understanding of life, because my experience has been that, especially in the last couple of years, as I've grown older, turning and talking to a dragonfly. It stands there and it's flopping its wings and it's listening. Mm-hmm. Or when you step out into the yard and here comes a mockingbird, the mom is ready to beat you down because you're out there.
And you are too close to the nest.
That's right. And the best one was a couple of years ago. I had put out some new patio furniture that had stuffing. And this squirrel decides, he wants my stuffing. And you had to see this little thing fighting and screaming at me because I was screaming at it. What are you doing? What are you doing to my furniture? So
Yes,
it's just,
yes.
life is just wonderful if you really are in that moment and just being present.
Right.
So I just
And
wanted to
that's
share that.
Beautiful. Thank you, Julia. And that is, of course, what we are constantly seeking to do, is to perceive behind, beneath the form, to perceive the presence of life itself. Yes, thank you.
All right, I see Donnell with his hand raised. Would you like to unmute yourself and join us?
Hi, Donnell.
Hey, good morning. You know how excited I get about this, right?
Yes, I do. I love it.
You are killing it. This is amazing. I think this is the kind of information that really allows people to truly feel worthy and understand the nature of breakthrough. But there's this quote that says, if you see yourself as purely physical, you're limited by the finite. If you see yourself as spirit, you become infinite. And it reminds me of Nikola Tesla, who was able to draw so many different amazing things beyond his years from the quantum, which was always seeking expression.
Right.
In terms of the nature of reality and multiplicity, it just reminds me of reincarnation, where we play different characters, and each role in terms of the evolution of consciousness. And I had this revelation not too long ago, and I'm kind of similar to the lady that was speaking, who says she's embarking on multiple different projects. And sometimes we do feel this sense of fear, but it reminded me that we have relationship with things that we can't see.
Yes.
And in universal mind, there's no I or me. And universal mind is just we and us. Mm-hmm. And the role that multiplicity sees and views in terms of consciousness is always in role of us being a family and having like this cosmic lineage that we're often unaware of. Mm-hmm. But the more that we come in relationship with it, like Jesus said, I and the Father is one, the easier it is for us to allow the goodness of God to interact with our lives and allow us to express that dominant well-being that's always present.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. Thank you so much for bringing all that into the room. We'll see that that is exactly, when we turn to the next two little sections, that is exactly the point, right? It is about trusting that limitless reality, because if a movement of life and an inner process of consciousness can begin the creative process, can actually engage in creation, the question is, well, how does creation then, how does that follow into form? Well, the answer to that is through the intelligent process of the infinite. It knows how to do that. There's an intelligence that takes that movement of life and that inner process in consciousness and makes forms. And those are the things that we can trust. Those are that whole movement of consciousness is everywhere present. It's not just present in our meditation. It's not just present when we're doing a prayer or a spiritual mind treatment. It's not just present in some book or even in an individual. It's present everywhere, right? And so we can rely on that. And it might show up as an individual or a book or a guide or an inspiration, or on and on and on it goes, right? And that is that larger reality that then if we can pop ourselves out of our limited human self, we have this infinite intelligence that is operating as us, that shows up as us, that we can rely on. Beautiful. Okay, we have a hand over here, and I don't know if we have more online.
Yeah, we do. And and then we should be good.
Okay.
Okay.
Online or what?
Where are we going first, Ryan?
Round and round we go in the room.
Okay.
And you're unmuted.
All right. My name's Gordon. And I love what you said, because when you first talked about branches, I thought you were going to the actual physical branch of a tree. But I'm glad I waited to hear where we are now, because all around us we have perfect examples of the infinitude of the universe. Think about a tree, the branches. What's on the branches? Leaves. There are a multitude number of leaves more than is actually needed by that tree. Grains of sand on the beach. Right. So overwhelming. Ernest Holmes in Law and Love says that if you think of the number of fish eggs that a fish throws out into the water, if all of those fish eggs turned into fish, there would be no water left in the oceans.
Right.
So we have these, and we seem to have completely overlooked them. What you talked about, I love you put something together and take it to Davos and some of those other places, because they truly don't believe in the infinitude of the universe. They don't realize that there's lots of evolutionary species that are extinct now, but that hasn't ended anything. And yet sometimes we think if we don't completely redo everything in one section of the country to support one species, then it's the end of the universe. And the universe says, no, it's not.
Well, no, and if we would leave that section alone, the universe, all that multiplicity would come back right again, would completely regrow and reveal itself again. It is everywhere. You're exactly right. And life cannot be created or destroyed. It simply changes form. Let's just hope that we don't destroy our planet so much that it doesn't have an opportunity to reassert itself in its natural way, right? Because we are now the place where we're contributing. We're now the ones that are contributing. It's no longer just the life itself doing what it does. We are now having our impact. Yeah, it's so important. Good. Thank you, Gordon.
All right, I see Marjorie has her hand raised. Marjorie, would you like to unmute yourself and
Hi,
join us?
Marjorie. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I've been listening, and one of the things that I've noticed is that when we talk about the movement of life, that we don't seem to want to also include that in that movement of life there's a natural process of coming into form and moving out of form and back into spirit. And that moving out of form back into spirit we experience as human beings and
Oh, absolutely.
manifestation as death and dying.
Right.
So I wonder what you think about the notion that part of, or a big part of the fear that we experience as human beings is our inability or unwillingness to accept our own mortality, and that a lot of fear is the underlying fear of the fear of death.
Well, I would 100% agree with that, because we believe that when we die, we stop, which is nonsense. Because if we are then infinite manifestation, if we are a manifestation, a place where the universe is individualizing itself as us, of course, just because we lay down this physical form, of course, there's no ending to the infinite life that we are. And so it's a false fear, and it's a fear that comes because we're inside our human experience. And I think, as Gordon so beautifully said, one of the places for me that I really began to, I always work with nature metaphors, right? And so if life is the sap that comes up the tree, and my infinite life is the tree, then I'm going to be, every season, I'm going to be a different set of leaves. And the leaves fall. And actually then they do a great thing to support the earth so that it can be renewed, and new leaves are brought out. And that is a constant process. So what I want to do is I'm just going to say, Margaret, you're exactly right. And we're going to hold that thought, because right now we're not talking about the human experience. What we're talking about is the nature of reality. And it's really hard. You'll notice that in talking about the nature of reality, we almost inevitably talk about ourselves. And it's a philosophical discipline to try to talk about the nature of reality without imposing a human experience on it. And then to ask ourselves, what does that say about the human experience? That's where we're going to go next. What does that say about the human experience? Because as we understood in this earlier chapter, all change, it is the wherever change takes place, must take place within the one, right? The infinite life is changeless. But form, as she so beautifully said, form is by nature changing. And so that includes our human form, our human experience. All life in form, in expression, goes through a cycle of life and birth and life and death and birth and life and death and birth and life and death. It's an infinite, never-ending cycle. Right? And that's why, again, if we can look at the nature of reality a little bit from that, what we call the observer point of view, we can recognize that that birth and death is true about our humanness. and that we will lay this body down. And you're right, we have to make friends with that. We have to stop being afraid of that. We have to really understand what's actually going on there. And sure, it's frightening because we hate the unknown. And the whole point, I think, as Shauna said, right, we have to learn to trust. We have to learn to trust that. And that is a big, big, big issue for people, especially because then death has become a medical event. We're not supposed to die, so they try to keep us alive long past our body can actually be alive on its own. I mean, there's so many things wrong with the way that we focus on, the way that we avoid and focus on death. It's in our culture. It's really, really challenging. So that's why we want to get a good grasp on the nature of reality so that we know that we're trusting life. We're trusting this ongoing impulse and that expression is always changing. What we're trying to get a hold of is what causes creation to come into being in the first place. That's what this is about. How does creation come into being in the first place? Then we're going to talk about how do we take that up. Right, so right now we're constructing a philosophical framework. The whole first section of the science of mind is the philosophical framework. The second middle section is all about how do we apply it to our lives? How do we live it in our lives? How does it answer our fear of death, our desire to manifest, our own impulse to create? All of that we will dive into very, very deeply. So thank you for keeping that in the forefront of our minds. All right, last comment?
Yeah, I just had one quick thing that I wanted to bring up, and it's a little bit of a different dive, but as we continue through the science of mind, you'll see how this all applies, because we have a wonderful workshop that's going on later today.
Yes.
And I wanted to make sure that everybody online and here in the room was aware of the democracy and advocacy training that you guys are doing later on today. It's really a deeper dive into what do we do once we realize this power within ourselves, and how do we take that out into the world. So I'm going to go ahead and post the link here in the chat for the folks who are online who might be all over the world who want to join in.
Yes, beautiful. Thank you so much, Ryan. And so keep reading, keep thinking, keep asking questions, keep feeling, imagining, however you, like for me, it's a big whole like sensate thing. Just keep the ideas rolling around in your brain, in your heart, in your mind, in your consciousness. And we'll see you next week. We'll see you in the celebration here in a little bit. We'll see you at the training. We'll see you when we see you. Bye for now.